It's hot chocolate season! This video is not sponsored. Hey everybody, happy October! October is on its way out, and as of this recording, I have been through half of my peds rotation, so I'm gonna talk about that and just go over the last couple of weeks. First of all, fall is here. The main way I know that fall has arrived is that I start having to scrape ice off of my windows in the morning, and especially because my first 2 weeks of the pediatrics rotation were inpatient, I was particularly affected by the below freezing night temperatures. I would wake up, it would still be dark outside, I would walk out, and I would touch my windshield and see if there was any ice on it, and these days there's always ice on the windows, so I have to scrape it off before I can leave. That's what Connecticut fall looks like to me. After the primary care block ended right at the beginning of October, I went on a little New York City day trip. Chai and I basically ate our way all over Manhattan. We got there really early in the morning, and we tried a whole bunch of different restaurants that we had never been to before, walked around, and enjoyed the early fall cool and crisp weather. Since I've actually finished the inpatient portion of my pediatrics rotation, I might as well talk a little bit about it now. Most Quinnipiac medical students' inpatient pediatrics rotation is at Connecticut Children's Medical Center. We actually see pediatric surgery patients, but we work with a lot of medicine attendings at the hospital. This means that we get to see certain pediatric cases that we learn about in textbooks, but wouldn't necessarily get to see if we were working only with medical attendings. However, it does have the disadvantage of missing out on a relatively significant portion of pediatric inpatient medicine. One of the cool things about being at an entirely pediatric hospital is that I got to see a lot of rarer conditions that before I had only learned about in class or through textbooks, but that I could never have imagined I would actually see in real life. I saw conditions like pyloric stenosis, intussusception, genetic conditions such as Down syndrome and Turner syndrome. One of the most interesting conditions that I saw was Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, which I thought I would never see a real life patient with because the condition is just so weird. You'll just have to look up this condition if you want to know what it's about. It is kind of crazy. Now, I'm not sure if it's because of the strange format that the inpatient pediatric rotation was in, but I don't really know if I can make an opinion on whether or not I like inpatient pediatrics specifically. It was really cool to see such a wide variety of pediatric conditions, and it was really nice to be in a children's hospital environment where you're surrounded by children and every doctor is there to take care of children, so you get a huge variety of specialties there as well. However, given that I am a big fan of preventive care and well visits, I did miss seeing healthy kids, and every patient who I saw was in a hospital bed, often tied up to a bunch of different tubes and lines and IVs. It was a little sad to see kids like that, especially when you saw kids who had been in the hospital for weeks or months and their length of stay numbered in the hundreds of days. That was a little bit sad to see. Of course, like all of my rotations so far, the inpatient part of my peds rotation came to an end all too quickly, and I was tossed into outpatient pediatrics. For the 4 weeks of my outpatient peds rotation, I am working with my old preceptor who I worked with throughout first and second year. During those first 2 years, I spent one afternoon in his office every week, learning how to develop my clinical skills and examine patients and get comfortable speaking with patients and their families. Of course, this came with both pros and cons. A big pro was that I was already familiar with the office. I knew how to use the EMR, I knew the names of most of the staff, and I already understood a good portion of how the workflow goes when a patient comes in for an appointment. This made the adjustment period much quicker and easier. However, an equally big con is that my preceptor's site is about 45 miles away from where I live. Driving there takes me an hour when there's no traffic, and there's always traffic at the times when I'm leaving and going. If I leave home at 6 in the morning, I get there at about 7:30 a.m., which leaves me about an hour to get some work done, do some studying, and get some reading done before I go into the office when it opens at 8:30. We usually see our first patient at 9. Just to give you some perspective on how bad the traffic is in the morning, if I left at about 7 o'clock, I would probably be late. Anyway, enough about logistics. I've only been at my outpatient site for a week, but I do have a couple of preliminary thoughts that I wanted to share. First, I am interested in pediatrics, so I already have a lot that I feel like I'm learning and gaining from this rotation. But I think regardless of whether you're interested in pediatrics or not, the rotation really helps you develop your skills in communicating with patients and families. One of the things that is often really difficult for students to get used to when it comes to pediatrics is that your patient often can't communicate with you. And so you have to rely on a third party, the parent or the caregiver, to give you information about the patient and what's been going on. Also, because you're gathering information from a third party, you have to be particularly observant of the relationship between the patient and the person who's supplying the information. And you have to see how the patient's signs and behavior matches up or doesn't match up with what the caregiver is telling you. Additionally, pediatrics allows you to develop your skills in communicating with patients and families in clear and simple terms. Another concept that is huge in pediatrics is something called anticipatory guidance, which is when you give parents information in anticipation of a child's upcoming transition or new stage of life. So, for example, when a baby comes in for their 6-month visit, 6 months is often the time when parents start introducing solid foods. And so you want to prepare them for that by telling them, here is how you start introducing solid foods. Here are the kind of foods that you might want to start with. Here are the foods to avoid giving them because they might be potential allergens or choking hazards. Information like that is really important to give the parents so that they don't call you later with questions that could have been easily answered at the visit. My preceptor has also been trying to teach me a couple things that don't necessarily relate to pediatrics specifically, but are more about primary care or even just medicine in general. These include things like chart review, dealing with labs and consults and imaging studies that come in from outside sources and piecing them together for your patients. So you'll get a stack of paperwork that has a whole bunch of consults in it, all for different patients, some of whom you may not remember or may not even know. And you have to look at this information and say, do I need to do something about it? Do I need to call this patient and tell them to come in for an appointment to follow up on these results? Should I just make a note in the chart for the next time they visit to mention something to them? This is part of the reality of practice for many physicians, regardless of their specialty. And so he's trying to teach me a little bit about how to deal with stuff like that. He was very upfront with me in saying that he was basically giving me scut work, but it was actually very educational, and it's something that I think we don't learn in medical school, but then come intern year, we get slammed with stacks of paperwork like this, and we just have to know magically how to deal with them. And so I think it's a good thing that in his own special way, my preceptor is trying to teach me about some of the realities of practicing medicine in the modern age. And I think that will help me be a little more prepared for those realities when I get to them in a couple of years. Okay, those are my main thoughts on my pediatrics rotation so far. November is going to be an interesting month. I'm going to a couple of different conferences. I'm finishing up my pediatrics rotation. The week of Thanksgiving is in there. So next month's video is going to be an interesting hodgepodge of things, but hopefully you're enjoying watching so far, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!